Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today I'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend. But before I do that, please be sure to smash the like button, light up that fire button, and also to make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. Also, if you wish to support the channel, there are a wide variety of ways for you to do so, and the newest one is that you can actually find me over on Locals, which reminds me to shout out Goblin Squatch, who is officially my first supporter over on Locals. And if you want to find out more about Locals and the kind of stuff that you might get access to over there, go ahead and check out my Locals page. A link will be in the description, and you can find out whether or not you want to become a monthly supporter over there as well. All right, let's go ahead and dive into some of these numbers. And so the big story, of course, is that Fast 9 continues to dominate the North American market with now a $115.9 million box office gross for this market, which makes it the very quickest film to reach the $100 million mark in the time of the pandemic. Obviously, a lot of people are looking at that number of 67% drop from last week, and obviously that is a very large number. But as I was saying on a previous stream, because some people had kind of been pointing this out, saying, hey, do you think that this indicates that people are rejecting Fast 9, that it's really bad news for Fast 9? And my answer was not really. And the reason why is because even though the 67% seems like it's very, very high, you always have to look at what the first weekend's numbers were, and therefore you're able to get that kind of comparison. And so the film made around $22.8 million this past weekend, but it had made over $70 million the previous weekend, and obviously it has continued to make money throughout the week as well, which is why now it's at over $115 million after 2 weeks of release. Now, as I've mentioned previously, I'm not going to be able to do any official predictions for Fast 9 because it had such a weird, bizarre release schedule where it released very early in China, and the vast majority of its money has been made in China. And I think that is where, if you're going to talk about whether or not this film is successful financially or not, the story really should be focused on, because remember, studios only get about 25% or so of the actual Chinese box office, because most of that money is kept by the Chinese Communist Party of China, because working with commies doesn't ever really work out well for anybody. But still, Fast 9 made $22.8 million in its second weekend, a massive drop, but it still made a decent amount of money, and it has crossed $100 million, which is a pretty big deal when you talk about films coming out during the time of the pandemic, post-pandemic period. We also had a couple of new films come out. The Boss Baby 2, a film that I know everyone was wanting and dying to go see. Apparently not. This, again, interesting that all three of the top films of the weekend all come from the same studio in Universal. And this film, Boss Baby 2, made $16 million, which seems like it would be a decent amount of money, even though the budget of the film was not very high. It is interesting to see that this film still has a little ways to go if it's going to make its money back. Now, one could obviously talk about The Boss Baby and how it could be making money through other financial means, through other revenue streams, things like that. But remember, we can only really look at the box office numbers as they stand right now, as they are posted. And then the third film, or the number 3 film of the weekend, was The Forever Purge, which is seriously, when it's called The Forever Purge, part of me is like, yeah, because these films seem like they will go on forever and that there will never be a stop to this franchise. And when you look at the production budget, you can kind of see why. It does not take a lot of money to get these films going, and so many people are just willing to go watch mindless violence of people killing each other legally that they just decide, oh, I'll spend my money on this weekend, and they end up making their money back and also make some profit. So it's a pretty quick way to make a little money, a quick buck basically, for Universal, and it kind of makes sense why they would continue to do so. But even that film, again, obviously in pandemic times, as we saw with Spiral, which was another low-budget film in the Saw universe, which you would think, okay, you release that film out during October maybe, you spend very little money on it, and then you make a huge return on the investment. Even that film, though, lost money, and so we're seeing that even the low-budget films, the ones that are typically guaranteed hits or at least guaranteed to make their money back, even they are kind of struggling to get their money back in the current marketplace. And that's why a lot of people, I think, are wrongly looking at movies like Fast 9 and other films like Godzilla vs. Kong and saying, look, the box office is here to stay. It's back, baby. But when you actually dive into the actual numbers and you see how much they actually get and you see how much the actual net profit is, you realize that, yeah, the box office still has a long way to go before it's back by any means. If even the lower budget films aren't making their money back, how could a big budget film possibly even make its money back? Even though having a lot more name recognition, having its name in different marketplaces, one could totally look at that and see that in that way. It is still something that people are not really, I don't think, considering all that much when they, I think, wrongly say the box office is back. The big test, of course, will be this coming weekend because we, of course, have Black Widow coming out. I personally don't think the film's going to be doing nearly as well when you compare to other Marvel films. I think, personally, you could see the film do pretty much Ant-Man numbers, which Ant-Man itself was a financial success. It made its money back. But I think when people look at a film like Black Widow, like the hype around it, they would expect that film to be a massive success. And even though a lot of box office projectors, people who project the box office way too early, in my opinion, are now projecting it to make a lot more than initially they thought it to be, I still don't think the film is going to do nearly as well, especially with early reviews coming out very mixed and people like Jeremy Jahns, who has a very massive presence online, not liking the film and really calling out the fact that the villain is not all that compelling. But of course, I'll have more information about Black Widow in the upcoming box office breakdown for next weekend. So let's go ahead and dive into some of these numbers. So again, Fast 9 is up to $490 million worldwide. But as I said, we have to remember that the vast majority, look at that number, right? $215 million of that 490 comes from China, of which they only get 25%. So you start to realize that the number you see is not that impressive. The number you start to see is not as impressive as once thought. Now, the studio is not going to say that. The studio is going to say, look, we're almost at $500 million. We're the most successful film to come out this year, which is true, right? All of those things are true, but it's not the complete truth. It's not actually looking at the raw numbers. It's not actually looking at the return on the investment. Now, of course, one could say, okay, a lot of these movies now have multiple studios involved, and so what it is to say a film is a flop or not, since you don't typically have one studio putting all of their money into one specific film, you have multiple studios putting in, little bits and pieces here and there. And obviously, there are other deals that happen in these films where they're making deals with massive corporations and companies, and they probably get money from that too, which offsets some of their losses. But looking at it just from a box office standpoint, we used to be in a point where a Fast 9 film would be pretty much broken even about 2 or 3 weeks into the film. And we're looking at this movie still, as of today, not broken even looking at the raw box office numbers, not including the 25% take from China, again, not including the lower number that would be actually projected there. The Boss Baby 2, $17 million. Again, that movie's not making anything overseas, which is really not all that surprising. And of course, people might try and say, hey, it's going to make some money online, don't you worry. But again, the film was made for $82 million, which is actually kind of on the lower side for a lot of these big CGI fest animated movies. So $82 million is not all that high. But when you look at $17 million versus $82 million, and you remember that they only get about 60% of that $17 million, you start to realize, oh, that's a bit of a problem. It's not looking very good for The Boss Baby 2, which, hey, you know what? I don't mind that movie failing at all because no one really asked for it. The Forever Purge made $16 million versus a $18 million production budget. And so that's what I was saying before. These films cost very little to make. And $18 million is very much a low-end number. But as you can see, the international box office really is not responding all that well to this movie. Even the domestic box office is not responding all that much. If we even look at this film having a healthy 50% drop, it'll probably be, more than that or slightly less. Again, it really depends on a lot of different factors. With Black Widow coming out this weekend, I imagine that the entire box office, or the vast majority of the percentage of the box office, will be for that movie and not for this one. But again, that will kind of determine how much of a drop we see in this film or not. $12 million is really not that good because it means the film probably will make, $6 million next weekend, which would put this film in a position where it would still very much have a long way to go to make its money back, as you'll see in the full chart I show at the very end. Hitman Wife's Bodyguard is up to $45 million, which, when you remember the production budget, not very good. Again, another sequel that nobody asked for. Notice how we have a trend here, right? Sequels that no one asked for and very little originality, in fact, in any of these films. Cruella, $204 million. Now, this is a movie that is actually doing better than it had been. It is making some gains in certain markets. Someone in the comments section last week said, how can you say it's making gains? Well, because I look at the numbers and I see, oh, this is like a good 20 to 30 million more than it was last week, which, whether you like the film or not, whether you like Disney or not, $20 to $30 million after several weeks of release is still a pretty good number. Now, most of that is coming from the international box office, and so we obviously take that into consideration. It is not really coming from the domestic box office. It's kind of basically died at the domestic box office because of their really terrible release schedule. And it is still very much in the red, but it's not as much in the red as it had been previously. But do remember, $23.6 million of that international box office comes from China. And so the numbers aren't going to be as good as they may look on paper. Peter Rabbit 2, another sequel that no one asked for. Again, $126.3 million. This film, actually a pretty big financial success. One of the most financially successful films of the year when you actually look at the raw gains and profits, just like The Conjuring Part 3. Again, another series of movies. But somehow, some way, was actually able to make a fair amount of money, especially in an international box office. And remember, because this film is dealing with supernatural stuff, there is no China to have to worry about here. And so they keep a lot more of their money. And In the Heights, a movie that, again, if anyone was going to try and make the point of diversity sells tickets, apparently it doesn't. $35.4 million there. So let's go ahead and dive into the chart. As you all know, I like to do some charting here. So The Boss Baby 2, $17.5 million in its opening weekend. The Forever Purge at $16 million in its opening weekend. And as you can see, I do not have any official numbers for Fast 9 because it had that staggered release in other countries, which makes predicting the end result pretty much impossible at this point. Let's go ahead and dive in to see what exactly it has done so far. So The Boss Baby 2, $17 million, seems like respectable, but it had an $82 million production budget, meaning it cost $123 million when you count marketing or typical marketing cost, which means the film currently stands at negative $112.4 million. Now, I suspect that this film is going to see a massive drop this coming weekend, as I said, just like with The Forever Purge, because of Black Widow getting the vast majority of attention at the box office next weekend. But $112 million loss. Oof. I'll be able to make some official predictions and projections next week about what kind of loss we're probably going to look at by the end result. At this point, though, that's not looking very good. A very small return on the investment, a very small number next to a very large production budget with marketing costs, not looking good for that film at all. We also, of course, had the other sequel that no one asked for, The Forever Purge, coming out $16 million, but that was versus an $18 million production budget, meaning it costs around $27 million when you account marketing cost into account. And then you see here that film also is at negative $17 million. And so taking that into consideration, when I talk about how this film is probably going to see some 50% drops, maybe more, maybe less, probably more because of Black Widow, you're realizing that this number is going to lose a lot of steam very quickly. And it still has $17 million to make up. And remember that the reason why this number is the way it is, people say, wait a minute, $16 million, it costs $18 million. But again, you have to take that not only against the marketing cost, but then also realize that the studio only gets about 60% of the entire box office. And when you take into account, if there's multiple studios involved in any of these movies, it means that 60% is actually divvied up across the board, which means that if a studio puts in a lot more money, it doesn't get all of that 60% of the box office. It only gets a portion of that, which could actually be worse. So again, those are other things to consider in that way. Fast 9, $490 million. Seems like it'd be a massive hit, right? Because of its massive production budget of $200 million, $300 million with marketing. Negative 5. Still has not officially broken even yet. And this is not even taking into account that a huge portion of this they don't get a lot of because of that 25% cut that they only get from China. So again, something to consider there. $45 million for The Hitman Wife's Bodyguard. So that's negative $62 million. So this is a guaranteed flop. Again, I was able to project that not too long ago because of the numbers we had after the first 2 weeks. You also have here $35 million for In the Heights. So again, $61 million loss for that movie. Not looking good at all. And then we actually have a couple of films that are actually in the black, actually have made money with $8 million and $45 million respectively for films like The Conjuring Part 3 and Peter Rabbit 2. So Peter Rabbit 2, interestingly enough, is a pretty successful film at this point, but not as successful as The Conjuring Part 3. Again, $45 million is probably one of the largest numbers we've seen really during the pandemic period as far as films in the positive. In fact, if you look to all of the movies that I've been covering since the time of the pandemic, you really don't see any films really with any larger number, with the one exception being this movie right here, which would be The Invisible Man, which remember came out last year, which was right around the time the pandemic started. So, yeah, basically, okay, wait, hold on. You have $57 million here. Yet sometimes the chart is a little harder to see. Yeah, Quiet Place Part 2. So Quiet Place Part 2 right now and Conjuring Part 3 are the most financially successful films of the year. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but then when you realize that the biggest box office profit is $50 million, you start to realize why a lot of studios are still a little nervous about releasing their movies and why a lot of studios are still moving and shifting things around because, again, anyone who says the box office is back, baby, isn't really looking at the actual numbers. But what are your thoughts about any of these box office numbers? Let me know in the comment section below. Also, make sure that you smash that like button and light up that fire button if you're watching on Odyssey, and make sure you're subscribed. And remember, you can support this channel in a wide variety of ways. I am live over on patreon.com, subscribestar.com, and also, as I said, on locals.com as well. And again, a shout out to Goblin Squash for being my first Locals member and first Locals subscriber, because you can follow me for different posts that are free. And then there are going to be some posts that are similar to what I would post on Patreon Subscribestar at that $10 level. And so that is not going to change. You're not going to get anything necessarily different than you would from those platforms, because I'm trying to keep everything pretty much streamlined in that way. But if you do want to support it, think about following me and subscribing over on Locals. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Thank you all very much for your love and for your support. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my July Patreon and Subscribestar members: Andrew Hoyle, Biffer de Hobbit, Brian P., Dion, Don Bruno de la Mancha, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, It's a Trap Productions, Jason Clark, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toone, Jonathan Carney, Laura the Modern Major General's Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mr. Peabody and his evil twin with the beautiful hair, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Riff Magos, Rosetta Allen, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina B, and Tina Bojan. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on Patreon, and also to my Subscribestar members: Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, John B, Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK Man. Thank you all very much for being here today. And if you want to have your name shouted out at the end of every single live stream and video on the channel, please make sure to check out the links in the description of ways that you can support me over on Patreon and Subscribestar as well. It gives you access to things like giveaways of Blu-rays, 4Ks, and digital codes. Also, access to a podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger, where we have a lot of fun. We also answer Q&A questions as well. And also you might get access to the Chosen of Valhalla level, which gives you access to a once-a-month podcast exclusively where I bring on you to the main channel with everyone else who is at the level, and we all just talk about movies, pop culture, and tons of fun stuff like that. And also, of course, Tina, who is the Empress of the Universe, is going to give us tons of reviews of movies and also maybe a couple of awesome rants here and there as well. So if that sounds fun to you, make sure you go ahead and check out those links. Again, you're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.